On July 23rd at 9:53 a.m., a hydrothermal explosion occurred at Biscuit Basin in Yellowstone National Park. This caused a panic in the area and left everyone asking what happened and what will happen next, as this popular geyser for tourists exploded with little to no warning. I was in the Yellowstone area when this occurred, but thankfully not at Biscuit Basin. When we went into the visitor center later that day, this is all everyone was talking about. This is all the TVs were showing with reporters, and all the park rangers were giving information on what was happening and what is expected to happen next. So, like everyone else, we wanted to know what happened and what will happen next with the park and what's going to happen with our stay for the next couple weeks. Now, before we get into too much detail, it is important to note that luckily no one was harmed during the explosion, as there were no reported injuries. However, this doesn't mean that there was no damage caused from the explosion at Biscuit Basin. All of the boiling water and rock that was hurled out of the geyser from the explosion luckily was aimed towards the Firehole River based off the angle that the geyser was at, instead of towards the boardwalk and parking lot where all the tourists were. So first question, what exactly happened at Biscuit Basin? The hydrothermal explosion was caused by a bunch of buildup of superheated water and steam in the geyser system just underneath the Earth's surface. So to be clear, this was not caused by volcanic activity. According to park rangers and researchers, the seismic activity, ground deformation, and gas emissions both before and after the explosion have remained about the same. And while the explosion may have looked volcanic with all the black smoke being shot out of the ground, this is actually mixed steam and superheated water with mud being shot out from the geyser that's creating that black-gray look. So this is steam, to be clear, not smoke. Like I just said earlier, not caused by volcanic activity. Another question a lot of people tend to have is, if it's a geyser, isn't it predictable? And the answer to that question is a little complicated. Some geysers are very predictable, like Old Faithful or some of the other geysers in the basin that erupt every 90 minutes or 2 hours or so, plus or minus a little leeway. But in fact, most geyser and geyser activity is actually really unpredictable in the park. And this predictedness is actually measured with the temperature of the geysers, not with the water level or anything else like that. So with the buildup of all the superheated water and steam, the temperature rose to a level that it normally doesn't, which is why this couldn't have been predicted, because this was never recorded before. It is also important to note that on average, there is more than one hydrothermal explosion happening somewhere in the Yellowstone Park every single year. It's just that the park is so big and has so many geysers that are untracked due to the roads and how massive the land is, that most of these happen in the backcountry where there are no people and aren't recorded for days or even months after they happen. The most famous hydrothermal explosion, other than Biscuit Basin recently, occurred back in 1989 in September at Porkchop Geyser in the Norris Geyser Basin. Porkchop Geyser is not the biggest or the hottest geyser in the area, and just like Biscuit Basin, caught everyone by surprise when the hydrothermal explosion happened and exploded the geyser and the pool surrounding it. Luckily with this one as well, no one was injured, which is surprising because the boardwalk goes right past Porkchop Geyser. So these explosions do happen every year. It's just really rare when they happen in an area where there is a development of a boardwalk or tourists are in the area, because they happen so infrequently if you consider how many geysers there really are in Yellowstone National Park and how many happen every single year. It's less than 1% chance of it happening to a geyser. Biggest question everyone has is, so what now? What's going to happen with Yellowstone, with Biscuit Basin, and just in the park in general in the future? And the answer to that is no one really knows. Historically, when large eruptions like this happen in the past, it tends to have a lasting effect on the geysers and pools in the surrounding area, causing them to go off more often or a little more intense than typical, which is also happening at the Biscuit Basin area. Researchers and rangers are monitoring all the geysers and pools closely as they close off the area for the remainder of the year. From what I have heard and read, they are planning on reopening the Biscuit Basin in the following season, but they need to do a little more testing to make sure the area really is safe and nothing else is going to explode like Biscuit Basin did. And they also need to build a boardwalk, which is a smaller detail that can happen much faster than the rest of this. But now, what's happening with Yellowstone National Park in whole? Is it dangerous? Are they closing? What are tourists going to do? Who really knows? However, we do know that changes like this have happened to Yellowstone constantly over the past hundreds of years as it has been monitored. There have been countless geysers that have shown up that weren't there before, and other geysers that were really active and consistent that are no longer showing any signs of activity. This is one of the biggest beauties of Yellowstone National Park. It is constantly changing every single year, every single month, and even every single day if you look closely. If you want an example of this, just look at the most iconic geyser, Old Faithful. When Yellowstone was first discovered, it used to go off every 60 minutes on the dot. Now it's going off every 90 minutes plus or minus 10 minutes, and this is just due to the geothermal activity underneath the geysers changing throughout time. Another example is the geysers in the Mammoth Springs areas, where the water is so mineral dense that geysers are opening and closing pretty much daily, and if you come 1 week, 1 year, and then another week the next year, you could be seeing completely different geysers and formations. These two are just a few examples of how changes are constantly happening in Yellowstone, and Biscuit Basin is just adding to those examples of how Yellowstone changes every single year.
As you can see, this is the Biscuit Basin behind me, and all this area that's all turned up and black shouldn't be like that. It should be more like the white and gray you see everywhere else around it. And you can also see that the boardwalk is blown up in some sections. Like I said earlier, thankfully no one was injured. And yeah, so it is closed off for the remainder of the season. They don't know exactly when it's going to reopen, but they do have plans on reopening it in the future once they have a little more understanding of how safe it is in the area and is there going to be another hydrothermal explosion happening.
And now, if you're wondering why I have brought up volcanic activity a couple times in this video, it's because Yellowstone is actually sitting on top of a huge volcano that went off hundreds of thousands of years ago that could technically erupt at any time. However, if this does happen, it would make national news across the world because the eruption would be so big it would wipe out possibly all of Wyoming and Montana at once. So if you hear any eruptions from news or anything else like that due to volcanic activity, it was not the volcano erupting. Usually geysers, maybe it was the heat caused by the volcano and the magma underneath, but that has all remained dormant for hundreds of thousands of years and will continue to do so. Well, that's everything that we're going to be covering in today's video. Hope this was really helpful and give you more direct information than what the news channels may give. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing below, as it helps the channel grow and reach more people every day. And if you want to see more things about what's happening in national parks around the country, let me know. I can definitely make more videos like this. Thanks for watching.